What if Jesus left behind a message so powerful, so quietly revolutionary, that it had to be buried literally, not just forgotten, not just rejected, hidden? A text more poetic than Paul, more subversive than John. A gospel not meant to be read aloud in churches, but whispered in secret among those who saw the world differently. It wasn't called the Gospel of Truth by its authors. That name came later, after the dirt was brushed away, after someone somewhere cracked open a jar beneath the Egyptian sands, and history shifted, just a little. But for now, let the sense of urgency soften. You've heard the whisper, now breathe it in. The pages aren't going anywhere. Let the desert wind settle. Let the candlelight flicker. We are about to turn to a gospel not of commandments, but of clues. Not of thunder, but of silence. You didn't come for noise, you came for meaning. In 1945, near a sleepy village in Upper Egypt, a farmer named Muhammad Ali, no, not that one was searching for fertilizer. He struck something hard, not treasure, not bones, clay jars, sealed. Inside, papyrus manuscripts carefully wrapped in leather and linen. They didn't shine. They didn't shimmer. But within them lay some of the most mysterious Christian writings ever discovered. Among them was a work unlike anything else, a poetic meditation dense and strange, filled with riddles and revelations. It would take decades before it was translated, let alone understood. But once it was, one phrase stood out from the page: the gospel of truth. Not a gospel. The gospel. As if all others were commentary. The text didn't tell the story of Jesus in any traditional sense. No birth in Bethlehem. No feeding of the 5,000. No triumphant entry, no cross. Instead, it whispered of forgetting and remembering. Of a world spun out of ignorance and a divine truth trying to call it home. Scholars linked it to a man named Valentinus, a brilliant Christian thinker, once almost elected Bishop of Rome, before his ideas were deemed too dangerous to survive. This was not a gospel about what Jesus did. It was about what he meant. What he revealed, not through miracles or parables, but through the very act of remembering who you really are. Before we venture further into the shadows, take a moment to subscribe so you never miss a secret that history has tried to forget. The jar didn't look like much. Bulging at the neck, sun-baked and sealed with pitch, it could have held oil grain or ashes. But it held something stranger, a bundle of leather-bound codices buried just outside the cliffs of Jabal al-Tarif. You imagine the farmer's hesitation. This was 1945 and magic still lingered in the Egyptian soil. Curses weren't punchlines, they were real. And when a man opens something ancient and unknown, his first fear isn't archaeological, it's spiritual. But the jar cracked, the contents removed, and within days, pages once read by early Christians, then banned, burned, and forgotten, were back in human hands. The Gospel of Truth was one of them. Not titled as such in the manuscript, but soon identified by scholars primarily due to a single reference by Irenaeus, the 2nd century bishop, who really had it in for heretics. He accused Valentinus and his followers of circulating a dangerous document called the Gospel of Truth, a work so subversive, so poetic, that it threatened to blur the boundaries between knowledge and salvation, between Christ and consciousness. This alone was a historical breakthrough. For centuries, this gospel was nothing more than a ghost in the writings of its enemies. Irenaeus mentioned it briefly in Against Heresies, which was basically the Yelp review nobody asked for but everyone read. He didn't quote it. He didn't analyze it. He simply condemned it, and that was enough to keep it lost. Until, like some theological time capsule, it was found again in the Nag Hammadi library. The fact of its rediscovery is not in dispute. 11 leather codices containing 52 texts, many of them previously unknown, were found in a red hill near Nag Hammadi. This is the historical anchor, the non-negotiable reality around which everything else orbits. But what makes this moment so tantalizing isn't just the what or the where, it's the why. Why were these texts hidden? Why sealed in jars and buried? And why did they survive so completely untouched by centuries of censorship? Here's where the scholarly debates open up like one of those crumbling codices. Some argue that monks from the nearby Pachomian monastery hid the texts during a 4th century purge of non-canonical writings. Others suggest a more mundane theory that it was a private stash hidden for safekeeping by a scribe sympathetic to Gnostic views. But in both theories, fear is the constant. Fear of loss, fear of heresy, fear of forgetting. And speaking of forgetting, remember that the gospel of truth will return to this theme again and again. In fact, it treats forgetfulness not just as a human flaw, but as the very problem Christ came to solve. It doesn't begin with sin. It begins with amnesia, a cosmic forgetting of who we are, where we came from, and what binds us to the divine. The controversial detail here is the jar itself. Some accounts claim it was shattered during a fight between the farmer and his brothers over the division of spoils. Others say it was deliberately broken by the mother fearing evil spirits. One version includes the murder of a man named Ahmed Ismail, whose blood was allegedly spilled over the manuscripts, imbuing them with a cursed reputation before scholars ever touched them. These tales straddle the line between fact and folklore, but in stories like this, folklore is part of the fact. And let's not pretend all scholars are happy about what was found. The language of the gospel of truth is frustratingly abstract. Unlike the 4 canonical gospels, it doesn't tell a linear story. It reads more like a riddle wrapped in incense smoke. One professor famously referred to it as a theological jazz solo. Others praised its beauty, even as they admitted they had no idea what parts of it meant. That's the thing with ancient mysticism, it's either profound or pretentious, and often both by the same paragraph. Still, the text breathes, not just because it survived, but because it pulses with questions no creed can answer. Who are we beneath our masks? What did Jesus really try to show us? And if truth is something remembered, not taught, then what are we forgetting right now? You might recall from our introduction how this gospel never refers to itself by name. That anonymity has become part of its mystique. It doesn't demand recognition. It doesn't shout its credentials. Like a message slipped under a door, it waits for you to find it when you're ready. That's how it begins.